What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 4 best builds in Borderlands 4. So in this guide I will give you a quick overview of each setup, then I will explain what skill trees and upgrades should you focus on, then as well we'll see what are the best weapons and how to get them, and then finally we will go over the stats, the class mods, your skill rotations, and even what specialization should you use, so we would be able to get the highest damage possible and much more. And remember, if you wanna check these builds, look up the best items, the skill trees and path of building, then check my links in the description. Also, if you're interested in buying other PC or console games with 50 or 70% discount, then check out Instant Gaming. For example, I want to buy Elden Ring, so we just click on Add to Cart, then click Pay, then input our details and pay. After payment is complete, we will receive activation key, then copy and paste the key in, and it's that simple. So what are you waiting for? Click my link in the description and check out Instant Gaming for yourself. This setup is known as the Peacebreaker Cannons build. The concept is super simple. You're placing down deployable cannons that also function as stationary turrets, and with the right skill pad, they stop being just support tools and turn into relentless laser death machines. What makes the build so satisfying is the combination of the brute force. With most other builds, you're constantly waiting on the cooldowns or juggling resources to keep your power going. However, Rafa completely sidesteps that problem, because thanks to skills like the Juerga early on and Inspirado later, your cannons are always available when you need them, and they never really fall off. And the crazy part is that these cannons will scale directly with your gun's damage bonuses. That means every investment you make into your weapons, crit multipliers or the elemental effects, they will all supercharge your turrets. You're doubling, sometimes even tripling your output without the extra effort. The gameplay loop could not be simpler. You just summon cannons, then fire your gun and watch entire groups of enemies evaporate in seconds. But beneath this simplicity is some wild scaling. Once you unlock the beam team capstone, things really go off the rails. Suddenly, your turrets will stop behaving like regular deployables and start acting like non-stop laser beams. They sweep across the battlefield, chaining through the mobs and punching holes in the bosses, and even shooting enemies from different angles that you aren't even aiming at. This build gives you that type of control that feels effortless yet devastating. So let's take a look at our skill tree. The big three priorities are uptime, damage and utility. These pillars will keep the build from ever falling behind, and as long as you follow the structure, you always feel like you're progressing. In the early game, you want to grab Sitiara and Instinto. These will give you that early burst of movement speed and super high power spikes right out of the gate. It doesn't seem flashy at first, but that mobility boost will help you to stay ahead of the fights, even reposition faster and dodge a lot of unnecessary damage. Then we immediately dive into the Juerga, and this skill is the real engine behind this build's uptime. Every point here just means your cannons will come back faster and stay up longer. It's the difference between having a nice gimmick skill and having your entire playstyle defined by the relentless turrets. Once your Juerga is online, you slide into the death hands and the pain reaction. These are straight multipliers to your gun damage, and remember, every single buff that you apply to yourself is also mirrored on the cannons, and suddenly both you and your turrets are shooting enemies in sync. This is where the build really transitions from the decent utility to okay, this is getting broken. And then when we come to the beam team, which is the crown jewel of this tree, here you will probably wanna sink few filler points into things like the vitriol, but once you unlock the beam team, the entire playstyle will transform. Your cannons will stop feeling like support guns and instead become sweeping beams of destruction. They no longer just chip away, they annihilate. From that moment and onwards, your DPS skyrockets. Then after this, you flesh out things with the Inspirado for more uptime and sustain, in the El Acran for additional crowd control and utility. Then later, you pick up Tenerario and Soldado, which are your late game power mode players. These nodes will stack raw damage in such a way that even the higher level bosses will feel like they're made out of paper. Now, if you find yourself dying more than you like to, then here's also wiggle room to shift points into survivability nodes. You won't lose much efficiency doing this, but for most players, I recommend to stick with a full aggressive setup. Overall, the Rafa build thrives when he's leaning all the way into the offense, and if you commit, then the endgame payoff is absolutely worth it. Then gear-wise, Rafa is a dream build because of his flexibility. A lot of characters in the Borderlands 2 require hyper-specific weapon types, or even elements to get real value out of their build, but Rafa's cannons will scale with all of your gun damage bonuses. That means as long as your weapon feels strong in your hands, It's going to be strong in your cannons too. That said, there are some clear standouts. Weapons with a high status effect chance are phenomenal, because your cannons will spread those same effects across the battlefield. A corrosive SMG, a shock shotgun, or even a radiation sniper can all feel OP. The underbarrel attachments are where things get spicy. Spread launchers, knife launchers, and tasers are all borderline broken with this setup. Not only do they chunk enemies fast, but if you cycle through the multiple weapons with different underbarrels, then you can essentially bypass your cooldowns and create a non-stop rotation of secondary firepower. Then when it comes to the rep kits, you got a ton of flexibility. EMP damage rep kits are great for bosses, and even let your cannons melt health bars even faster. Then lifesteal rep kits are perfect if you like staying in the thick of it without worrying about healing items. Then movement speed rep kits will make you incredibly slippery by letting you weave in through the chaos while your cannons keep firing. The beauty here is that none of these are mandatory. The Rafa is strong regardless, but with the right equipment combination, you just make it much smoother and more explosive. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. The rhythm is smooth and extremely forgiving. At the start of any fight, you want to drop cannons right off the gate, as they will cover the most ground. They immediately will begin chewing through the enemies, buying you the freedom to reposition, reload, or just open fire alongside them. From there, you essentially enter a flow state, so cannons lay down pressure and you just fire your gun into whatever's still standing. And together, this combo will melt everything in a sight. Thanks to skills like Juerga and Inspirado, you're rarely ever without turrets. Even in extended battles, your uptime is so high that you almost forget cooldowns exist. Your survivability comes naturally, so lifesteal rep kits will keep you topped off, while your turrets will constantly pull aggro away from you. Enemies will split their focus between you and the deployables, which makes the Rafa feel tankier than he actually is. And when the bosses show up, then you stack EMP rep kits, position your turrets for maximum uptime, and unload with your strongest gun. The combination of the DPS is ridiculous. It feels like you're running a co-op session, with friends that never miss. The pacing of this build is what really makes it shine. A lot of builds in Borderlands 4 are feast or famine, so you're either dominating or waiting around for cooldowns to reset. But Rafa avoids that entirely. His fights feel like a straight lineup upwards, so more damage, more pressure, and more explosions, until the battlefield is just empty. You don't ever slow down, you don't ever stall out, and you just keep on rolling from one group of enemies to the next one. So, this is a true minion-focused Deadringer setup that turns the Vex into a battlefield commander rather than just a frontline brawler. Instead of charging into the danger, this build leans into the strategy by letting our Reaper army do almost all the DPS, while you sit back and amplify their power. These aren't just basic summons. The Vex Spectres are lethal extensions of your build that scale directly off your gun's damage and the crit multipliers. I'd say you need to think of them as the ghostly assassins, so constantly applying pressure while you play the commander, by setting up kills and amplifying their destruction. The magic of this build is how efficient and smooth it feels to level. You don't have to go too deep into one skill tree, or wait for high level augments before the build turns on. Instead, you're cherry picking key nodes across the blue and the green trees by stacking immediate value that multiplies the Vex output while making your Spectres reliable in every fight. They handle the crowd control, and when bosses show up, that's where the Deadringers will truly shine. The Spectres are deceptively strong, but what pushes this build over the edge is how effortless it scales. Every new weapon, every rep kit, and every augment you find will simply translate into more firepower for your minions. While other builds require specific legendaries to work, this one tries on basic things, like the big damage bonus, crit multipliers, and sustain uptime on the Deadringer. So overall, this build outputs ridiculous amounts of damage, and the best part is that you can realistically use almost any gun, so shotguns, snipers, and even mid-tier AR slots will work beautifully. It's also one of the most entertaining builds to play, so you're watching an army of the Spectres swarm enemies, and that really never gets old. The only real con to this setup is that it's very kill dependent, so if you're not chaining kills, you feel weak, but as long as you're summoning, you're going to be dominating enemies in seconds. So let's take a look at our skill tree. The backbone of this build is a clever mix between the blue and the green, by maximizing crits, empowering your minions, and making sure that the Deadringer feels like a constant rather than a short burst. We start in the blue tree and get the Cold Iron. This one is fundamental pick because it immediately buffs our crit damage, which not only enhances our guns, but also directly boosts your Spectres, since they scale off the same damage multipliers. From there, we pivot into the green tree for Grave Sight and the Grave Implements. These are two cornerstone nodes that supercharge both our own precision damage and the effectiveness of our summons. Right out of the gate, you're stacking crit multipliers that make both you and your army terrifying. And this is where the build really is different from the typical rush capstone mentality. Instead of just investing points into one tree, just to unlock a flashy top-end skill, we cherry-pick the most valuable nodes. That means grabbing Grave Assault for cooldown sustain, then the Grain Fields for the stacking damage buffs, and Prismatic Weaponry for the weapon synergy. You don't need to chase flashy mechanics, because the raw numbers will carry this build. Then by the mid-game, we're layering in sustain and utility. Material components will feed into both, so personal DPS and the minion scaling, while recurrence will create a feedback loop where kills will feed from the power in your specters. If you're feeling squishy, then the blood sacrifice is for survivability. It trades some health to keep you in the fight, and because your specters are cleaning up mobs for you, you usually recoup that investment instantly. And then there's the flexibility. If you happen to snag the penetration augment on your throwing knife, then you can shift some points into the bloodletter, since guaranteed crits will suddenly make this bleed effect absurdly strong. However, if you don't get it, then that's not a problem. Just stick with the enhancement and the flat multipliers for more consistent leveling curve. The whole psychology here is adaptability. You're not locked into one rigid structure, but on the other hand, we're building around the gear and the jobs you get, while keeping the minions and the crits at our center of our setup. Now let's talk gear, because equipment is where this build goes from strong to devastating. The absolute must-have piece is the Penetrator augment for the throwing knives. This thing is ridiculous, as it effectively turns every toss into a guaranteed crit. When you pair that with the Bloodletter, you're looking at insane damage over time stacks that melt bosses in seconds. It's rare, but if you can find it, then never let it go. It remains relevant all the way through the campaign. Then for the guns, here's the beauty. Almost any kinetic weapon will work. Because this build leans into the crit scaling and the kinetic multipliers, you don't require one specific drop. That said, the shotguns are the clear winners, because simply, their high base damage gets multiplied so hard by the crit bonuses. A Jacob shotgun with a crit ricochet effect will work, but even a mid-tier Vladov AR or the Dahl burst rifle can work as well. Then underbarrel attachments add another layer of power. You want to get spread launchers, knife launchers and the shotgun underbarrels, as they are top tier, especially since they have internal cooldowns that you can bypass by the weapon swapping. This means if you're running multiple guns with strong underbarrels, then you can chain them endlessly for insane amount of burst windows. Then the rep kits are our pacing tool. The EMP damage payloads will make your shotguns and the snipers punch like a truck. Cooldown reduction will keep the dead ringer on the field more often, and lifesteal or the movement speed will help to smooth out our survivability gaps. And the psychology here is simple. Prioritize the raw base damage, then stack the crit multipliers, and let your specters scale alongside. Unlike other builds that need specific synergies, the Deadringer Vex is forgiving, so you can just use what you find and the build still works. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. The rhythm is methodical but incredibly rewarding. So step 1 is to always show your ordnance and start building kills. The moment that you activate the ringer, summon your minions onto the high ground or into position, with clean line of sight on the enemy groups. Positioning will matter, as specters are not the smartest, but if you place them well, then they will shred through the enemies much more efficiently. Once they're out, your job is to maintain the tempo. So keep chaining kills to feed your kill skills, and rotate between the guns and the throwing knives to maximize the crit uptime. You need to think of yourself as the enabler, so you're setting the stage for your specters, weakening priority targets and applying crit multipliers. Pacing is everything. If you slow down, then you feel it. Kills will drop down and sustain falters, and even the Deadringer's cooldowns will leave you exposed. But when you play aggressively, keeping momentum alive, then the build snowballs. Every kill stacks higher, every crit hits harder, and your Reaper army grows more relentless. And this is my favorite part, where most builds will start strong but taper off as the fighter goes on. The Deadringer Vex will ramp up. The longer you fight, the more unstoppable you feel, until the entire room collapses under your army, and you're left to pick up the weapons, while the whole battlefield gets destroyed. If you've been looking for a build that feels super powerful right out of the gate, doesn't require insane gear hunting early on, and still manages to scale into the late game without falling off, then this is the setup for you. At its core, this Harlowe build revolves around radiation damage with a status effects, while also using the chroma acceleration, which acts as your nuke button. Unlike some other builds that need a ton of legendary gear to come online, this one thrives on simplicity. The key mechanic here is the neutron capture, which basically converts the part of your acceleration damage into a flat radiation bonuses on all of your weapons. That means after pressing your action skill, every single bullet you fire is amplified with the bonus radiation ticks. The more bullets you shoot, the more radiation you dish out. So naturally, the high fire rate weapons will turn into absolute shredders. The best part about this setup is that it always feels on. You don't have to wait for big cooldowns outside of the acceleration. As long as you've got a fast weapon in your hands and you're hitting enemies, then your screen is going to be filled with constant explosions of the radiation procs. And because the damage type is generic and applies to every shot, so you don't have to think too hard about target selection, but just melt everything you see from left to right. Now there's also a couple of caveats. This build does rely heavily on having radiation guns, which is not always guaranteed while leveling. But the safety net here is that almost any elemental weapon with a high fire rate will still work fine, until you can get the perfect setup. You might not feel god tier immediately if the RNG is not too kind to you, but once acceleration starts stacking with the neutron capture, then the difference is day and night. So in a summary, this build has very fast-paced gameplay, massive status effect damage and explosions everywhere. So let's break down the skill tree. We're going to unlock a mix of radiation multipliers and the status damage scaling, with just enough defenses sprinkled in to keep things smooth. You will start with the cyclotron by stacking those 5 points right away. It looks modest early, but trust me, it's the cornerstone for building momentum. The movement speed buff and the extra shield uptime will give you that firing, which syncs perfectly with the playstyle, since you will be always using ammo. From there, we immediately grab the neutron capture. This is not negotiable. It turns your chroma acceleration from just a flashy AoV skill into the backbone of the entire build. Every action skill activation will make your guns insanely strong, and this is the synergy that keeps you ahead of the curve while leveling. After that, we move into the elementary with the 5 points, which boosts all of your elemental output, but more importantly, supercharges radiation procs. Then we layer in enriched, which adds consistency to your status effect stacking. It's one of those skills that doesn't feel flashy at first, but once you're hitting multiple enemies with the acceleration, the added status chance will make your screens light up. Then Poison Sun comes next, and this is where the build starts hitting like a truck. Every kill triggers more elemental splash damage, and because acceleration primes everything within the radius, you get wave of detonation every time that the mobs go down. Add in a couple of points in the glow up to help with the sustain, and suddenly you're not just dishing out damage, you're actively keeping yourself in the fight through the chaos. Then moving deeper, we pick up the chain reaction, which is a skill that literally makes your shot bounce into nearby enemies. Combine that with the neutron capture's flat damage bonuses, and it feels like every bullet turns into a miniature nuke. From there, the Demon Core and the Dirty Bomb amplify the explosions even further, and Wasted effect ensures that enemies already are weakened by radiation when it finishes faster. And then finally, to round things out, we slot points into the field ready prototype for utility, and then dip into the green trees. Here's where the flexibility comes in. The Maims Hum or the Momentum are your first go-to picks, depending on your weapon setup. So if you're running the Throwing Knives with the Penetration Augment, then Momentum can make you feel lightning fast, while the Mains Hum will give you smoother sustain. Past that, the Neutron Decay, Confirmative Reality and the Resonance Cascades all will pile in together for your radiation damage, which makes it scale absurdly well into the late game. And don't forget about the practical applications if you want more balanced defenses, or if you prefer the raw speed and the reckless gameplay, then invest into Get Up and Go. Next up, let's take a look at the equipment. With the Harlowe, the number one priority is always a radiation weapon with a high status effect damage. Ideally, you're looking for a melee 1 SMG, because their natural elemental output and the fire rate just synergize perfectly. Then the Vladov's AR also slot in nicely thanks to their insane rate of fire, but honestly anything that can dump a ton of bullets will feel great as long as it packs status. Now, if RNG blesses you, then Penetrator Augment on the Throwing Knives is a straight up broken. Against bosses or tanky elites, this thing shreds. If you just happen to find it, then consider shifting a few points around in the tree to pull some from the Glowing Up and drop them into the Fissile Launcher, or even Periodic Table Flip to maximize the payoff. Attachment-wise, you want to keep an eye out for the spread launchers, knife launchers, and tasers or the shotgun under barrels. These are overtuned right now, and can turn even a mediocre weapon into a monster. And here's a fun trick, because they run on internal cooldowns, you can actually bypass that by swapping weapons, so just cycle between two guns with the same attachments, and suddenly you're spamming rockets or taser shots non-stop. Then for rep kits, you want to prioritize action skill cooldown rate above everything else. The faster that you get acceleration back, the faster that you can trigger the neutron capture. And that's literally where the bulk of our DPS comes from. After that, the EMP damage, lifesteal or the movement speed are excellent for keeping your rhythm going. And then ordnance wise, grab anything that can output consistent radiation damage, so homing grenades or the radiation rocket launchers will fit perfectly. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. The rotation is simple but incredibly satisfying. Step 1 is to pop your chroma acceleration, and make sure that you tag multiple enemies within. This primes neutron capture and turns every gun into the radiation cannons. Then next, unload with the highest fire rate weapon. Every shot will chain explosions, status ticks and the splash damage. By recreating that signature, everything is melting feeling. And then the final step, during acceleration downtime, you just want to rely on the rep kit with the cooldown reduction. This is also the perfect time to throw grenades or use ordnance, since your raw gun damage dips a bit without the neutron capture. So the real beauty of this build is how it snowballs. Accelerator kills feed into the poison stun, chain reaction and the dirty bomb, which feeds into the more explosions, which then again even feeds into more faster room clears. And because cooldown gear will shorten acceleration downtime, you're almost always just few seconds away from your next radiation wave. The pacing is what makes it addictive. You're never waiting around for one big nuke. Your action skill is just the spark that sets off the constant chain reaction. And by the time that you are in the mid game, you will find yourself deliberately pulling bigger packs of enemies, just to enjoy watching them all blow up at once. If you're that kind of player who thrives on momentum, then this build is basically designed for you. The Onslaughter plus the Pyro class setup will turn the Amon into a sprinting fire gun that tears through the enemies with the fire rockets while melting everything around you. It's chaotic, it's aggressive, and it feels incredible to play because the faster and harder you go, the stronger you actually get. Amon is an elemental class, so by default he leans into the raw elemental power. Our specific retreat build makes the fire your main weapon. With the Pyroclast augment slotted into the Onslaughter, every time you activate it, you instantly refill your health and the shields, then spin up a fiery storm and convert your melee into the rocket punches. The synergy here is perfect by stacking movement speed and sustain, while keeping the action flowing non-stop. And the best part is that the more you kill, the longer your action skill will last, so instead of slowing down when the things get tough, this build actually ramps up with intensity. So let's take a look at our skill tree, and the backbone of this build lives in the red Calamity tree, which feeds perfectly into the Onslaughter's rhythm of the damage and survival. The early focus is getting you into the flow of constant speed and regen. You want to start with Impetus, which is a skill that feels small at first, but it snowballs fast. Those first 3 points will give you a stacking movement speed and shield recovery just for being active in the fight. It immediately makes you feel more slippery and aggressive, which is exactly the tone of this build. After that, the heavy plate will add a beefy layer of protection, since the Onslaughter regenerates a flat percentage of your max shields every second, so the bigger your shield pull, the more you benefit. You're not just tankier, you're actually feeding into the skill sustain loop. By the time that you unlock the Pyroclast, things really click. Suddenly, every Onslaughter activation will heal you to full, restore your shields and ignite the Forge Storm around you. It's the turning point where the build really stops being a good and becomes addictive. From there, you layer in more melee enhancers like the Gut Punch and the Titanium Knuckles, which will turn your rocket punches into the heavy-hitting nukes, while debuffing enemies at the same time. And survivability never gets neglected, so the Forged in Steel makes your slam a panic button for that total damage immunity, and the best defense keeps overshields flowing every time you land a hit. Together, they will make you particularly unkillable when you're in the motion. Then for the mid game, Into the Fray will add a serious punch to the close quarter fights by multiplying all of your melee and the fire damage just for being up close. It pairs beautifully with a rearm, which reloads your guns every time you land a melee attack. That synergy means you're never stuck reloading. You're alternating between the rocket punches and the gunfire in one continuous gameplay. Then, when you reach the Molten Royal, your slams will start dropping giant fire AoVs, and Mortal Flare will add those chain explosions whenever you finish off a weakened enemy. At that point, our fights will turn into the non-stop fireworks. This whole tree works great together together, because the longer the fight lasts, the more dangerous you become. Now let's talk about equipment, because this build lives and dies by its shield. Our Onslaughters regen is based on the percentage, so the higher your shield capacity, the harder you are to take down. That means you want to hunt for turtle or adaptive shields early. We want to get pretty much anything that pushes that capacity number up. Even with the health trade-off from the turtle shields, the payoff is worth it, because you are regenerating enormous chunks per second. Then for weapons, the key is burst. So shotguns, SMGs and the hipfire sniper rifles all will fit perfectly, because you want to shoot damage between the punches without slowing the tempo. And remember, Onslaughter automatically converts everything into the incendiary damage, so don't stress too much about the flash enemies. Where you need variety is encountering shields and armor, so having at least one cryo or corrosive gun for the armor targets, and one shock or the radiation option for the shielded enemies will cover your bases. Don't sleep on the underbarrels and alternative fire mods either. The Vladov tasers, corrosive mediocre throws and even proximity mines all will slot seamlessly into the build style of chaotic and high burst combat. And finally, we got enhancements and rep kits. For our rep kit, we wanna pick a defensive one, which reduces 50% of the incoming damage for several seconds, and make sure you're nearly unkillable during the tough fights. Meanwhile, weapon-specific enhancements like the Jacob's Ricochet or mediocre throw damage can boost your guns to the next level. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. The rhythm is simple but powerful, so at the start we activate Onslaughter, then dive straight into the enemies, and let the firestorm carry us. The rocket punches will keep you mobile and deal heavy burst damage. Your guns will fill the gaps between the swings, and your shield constantly regenerates, while you burn everything down. The sustain is so strong that you rarely have to disengage. Between the Pyroclast full heals, overshields from the beast defenses, and your innate regen, you just keep moving forward. When things get too hairy, just slam down the forge in the steel for the total immunity. Reset it with your rep kit, and get right back into the fight. The pacing is what makes it addictive. Most builds slow down as the fight jogs on, ammo gets low, cooldowns run out and sustain dries up. But with our build, the longer it goes, the faster and stronger you get. Every kill extends Onslaughters' duration and stacks your movement speed higher. Instead of getting exhausted, the build snowballs into a blazing storm that only ends when everything else is dead.